Well, for more, I'm joined from Belfast by Jude Collins, an Irish nationalist writer and commentator, and with me here in the studio, royal historian Charles Moseley. Thank you both for joining us. Charles Moseley, first of all, how do you see this moment?
Very much as an act of theatre. It took place in a theatre before it moved out into the real world. The Queen wore green, but it wasn't too green. It was lime green. It wasn't Irish green. She wore white gloves when shaking hands with Martin McGuinness. Now, I know that she usually wears white gloves when shaking hands with people, but then most handshakes aren't as important as this one.
So you see some significance in the fact she was wearing gloves, do you?
Oh, yes. There's significance in every line.
But she would normally wear gloves?
I think that on this occasion, if you're going to go in for an act of reconciliation, and when you have allowed yourself to be patted on the small of the back by Michelle Obama 2 years ago, I think that something could have been a bit more pally than that. Martin McGuinness is a cold man, but even he presumably has some sort of heart in him.
Jude Collins, what do you make of what you saw today?
Well, I think, you know, it seems to give a great deal of simple pleasure to a lot of people here, so I suppose it'd be hard to deny them the opportunity to have a few hours of joy. I don't believe in monarchy myself, and most nationalists don't, and certainly no Republican does. And to be honest, I feel to some extent it is a distraction, or maybe a better word is that the image, the theatre that was just mentioned by Charles, is of two warring tribes who've been fighting about religion for the last couple of decades, or 3 or 4 decades even. And now, thankfully, they've got round to making peace, and the Queen has now come to sprinkle her magic dust on that, and everything is okay. Somebody used the expression in another report on this yesterday, I think it was. They cemented the good relationships between these two islands. Now, that to me is actually a misrepresentation of the facts. The thing that has divided these two islands for centuries now is the fact that Britain claims the right to exercise jurisdiction in terms of passing laws and gathering taxes and garrisoning soldiers in Ireland. About a century ago, the southern part of Ireland, in the Easter Rising, it broke away and formed a republic, but the problem still remains here in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. And, you know, all the fine talk about this being the final step doesn't change that. That difficulty is there. If you have a medical problem, you'd be very foolish to ignore it or to pretend it's not there. I would say the same thing with regard to our political problem. We've got to work very hard at it and not pretend it isn't there.
Charles Moseley, do you agree with that? Do you think that some would see it as a convenient full stop that it's not?
I think that may well be the case. One of the most interesting things is that the people who have been quoted in the press and the BBC website and the people who've taken part in it are all old or elderly. What do the young people think about this? Do they regard it as something that still needs to be reconciled, to be coped with?
Let's put that actually right back to Jude Collins, because it's interesting, the perspective of the young who sort of came, I suppose, at the tail end of, you know, didn't live necessarily through the Troubles. Jude Collins, what do the new generation think? Is this history now? Do we move on, or is there a sort of new awareness?
Well, I think certainly most young people would probably find the whole thing a little bit baffling. The notion of monarchy, I think most young people, not all, but most, would find it as a bit daft, actually. You know, there's a funny way to select your head of state by picking one family and then doing a sort of genetic Russian roulette and hope that the right thing came out. I think, you know, most young people feel that the presence of the Queen, it's kind of like the visit of a pop star. Might be interesting to look at for a few minutes, but apart from that, it really doesn't matter very much. Whether they're committed politically, I don't think most of them are, to be honest. But there would be, I think, as many young people today who would have a political opinion on one side or the other. But they would, as Sinn Féin is doing, they would hope to pursue that by peaceful means, as distinct from armed conflict as we had in the past.
Charles Moseley, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh there today, not just obviously in their official capacity, but actually as people who experienced the impact of the Troubles, the loss of Lord Mountbatten. Does it send out a powerful message in terms of reconciliation, the fact that they were there, that handshake did happen?
Up to a point. I thought the most interesting thing that was the way the Duke of Edinburgh moved away.
Do you think that was deliberate? We spoke to someone earlier who said
absolutely deliberate.
It was sort of caught, unfortunately, by the camera.
Nothing that the Duke of Edinburgh does in such circumstances is anything but deliberate, I can assure you.
And
there is one person who has not forgotten what happened in 1979. His memories are every bit as deep and as bitter as the most hardened Sinn Féiner.
So there was no, as far as we could see then, there was no direct conversation, no handshake,
None.
no direct
It'll
contact
need more than a
between the two of
handshake
them.
involving white gloves to thaw the heart of the Duke of Edinburgh.
Jude Collins, do you think anybody wishes that Martin McGuinness hadn't done this, or is it just sort of one of those things now?
Yeah, I think there are a number of Republicans, I suppose you could call them hardline Republicans, certainly the dissident Republicans would be very critical of him. And I would say even some who would be considered less extreme, you know, they would find it hard to take, because essentially the Crown has represented England and its presence here. We've talked traditionally of the Crown forces when we're talking about the British Army. So I would say some of them have found that very hard to take. However, Sinn Féin are a political party, and political parties, when they make decisions, always do them partly with electoral advantage in mind. Now, Sinn Féin have said that they have made this gesture as part of their outreach programme to the Unionist people, who are their fellow countrymen here, and that they want to show that they're trying to heal the wounds of the past. But I think they also have in mind the fact that in the south of Ireland, where the Queen visited last year and where she was very warmly received, monarchy is kind of popular. So if they could, as a growing party in the south, show that they're capable of being friendly even, and certainly courteous, if not curtsying to the Queen, that might be to their electoral advantage. So I think at the back of their minds, like all politicians, there is the notion, will this serve me in the ballot box, as well as do the right thing as they see it.
Jude Collins and Charles Moseley, thank you very much.